This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. This is about a system quietly learning how to function without focus at the center. And once that happens, it does not announce itself. It adapts. What you are about to hear did not happen in secret. It happened on camera, in a room built for certainty, with scripts written, signals calibrated, money waiting, and yet something slipped. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to expose a dangerous truth most people miss because it feels familiar now. If you're watching closely, this is the moment where control doesn't collapse, it thins. Where authority doesn't vanish, it diffuses. And where everyone else in the room begins adjusting before you even realize why. Stay with me, because if this can happen here, it is already happening elsewhere. And once you see how the system compensates, you won't be able to unsee what comes next. Here is the mistake most people make. They look for chaos. They look for outrage. They look for villains. But the system doesn't break when people behave badly. It breaks when the wrong thing becomes the stabilizer. What actually controls power in moments like this is not ideology. It's not loyalty. It's not even authority. It's attention. Because modern power does not move through speeches. It moves through signals. Markets listen. Allies interpret. Institutions wait for cues. And when the person at the center cannot hold focus, something else takes over. Not officially. Quietly, staff learn to redirect instead of advise. Executives learn to flatter instead of argue. Media learns when to stay and when to cut away. Nothing explodes. Everything adjusts. And that's the danger. Because a system that can function without attention at the top does not correct the problem, it absorbs it. It reroutes around it. And once that happens, power doesn't disappear. It relocates. And that relocation is already underway, just not where you're being told to look. There was a time when moments like this were rare. Not because leaders were perfect, but because drift was treated as a warning before loss of focus triggered intervention behind closed doors. Corrections were invisible. Scripts were tightened. Damage was contained quietly. Now, something has shifted. The correction happens in real time, on camera, in front of people who know better and adapt anyway. That change did not arrive suddenly. It crept in, normalized through repetition. Before, unpredictability was an exception. Now it's a variable to manage. Before, aides advised. Now they steer. Before, attention-anchored decisions. Now decisions wait for attention. And the most dangerous part is this. Nothing feels broken. Meetings still happen. Statements still go out. Markets still open the next morning. But underneath, the system is no longer led. It's compensated. And compensation feels like stability right up until the moment it isn't. Because slow change doesn't trigger alarms. It rewires expectations. And once expectations adjust, reversal becomes almost impossible. Which brings us to the first moment where that rewiring became visible and impossible to ignore. This is where the room mattered. Not symbolically, practically. A meeting designed to project control, carefully staged. Cameras live. Executives present. Numbers ready. And then the script began to slip. Not with shouting. With wandering, praise stretched too long. Sentences looped. Focus drifted. The people in that room felt it immediately. Because this wasn't a rally. There was no crowd to carry momentum. No noise to hide confusion. This was business, energy, sanctions, leverage, and then a quiet intervention, a note passed, not strategy. Redirection, a moment aids dread because it means the system has already shifted into correction mode. On camera, the reaction froze the room, confusion, irritation. Control reasserted too loudly, and when the discussion tried to move forward, attention didn't follow. It wandered. And then something happened that no amount of planning could contain. The meeting stopped mattering. If this were about one lapse, it would end here. But this wasn't a lapse. This was a signal. Here's what was actually happening beneath the surface. When attention breaks at the top, the system doesn't pause. It reallocates. Conversation becomes performance. Praise becomes currency. Silence becomes strategy. The people who benefit most are not the loudest. They're the most patient, because in rooms like this, information no longer drives outcomes. Mood does. Executives learn which phrases hold interest, which compliments extend access, which topics trigger drift. Meanwhile, the cost doesn't vanish. It moves. Aides absorb it by translating impulse into policy. Agencies absorb it by clarifying statements that were never meant to be statements. Markets absorb it by reacting first and understanding later. And the president, he becomes less a decision maker and more a variable, not removed from power, surrounded by buffers. This is the hidden mechanism, not corruption, not conspiracy, adaptation. A system quietly optimizing itself around unpredictability because correcting it feels riskier than managing it. And that works until it doesn't. Because once power flows through intermediaries, accountability thins, responsibility blurs. And no one can say with certainty who is actually steering, and that ambiguity is about to matter more than anyone in that room expected. Now the pace accelerates, because once adaptation becomes routine, escalation doesn't announce itself. The meeting tries to continue. Numbers are mentioned, operations referenced, but the center is gone. Attention drifts, body language shifts, the room recalibrates in real time. And then the rupture, the chair empties. Not metaphorically, literally. A meeting called to project authority is abandoned midstream. Not for crisis, not for urgency, for a whim. This is where everything changes, because power didn't leave the room. It redistributed. Aides freeze. Executives wait, smiles harden. The system moves into containment mode, not to fix the problem, to survive it, and the cameras capture something no briefing ever will. The machinery running without its operator. This isn't chaos, it's worse. It's normalization in motion. Because once everyone adjusts, the unacceptable becomes procedural. And when that happens, the consequences don't explode. They accumulate quietly, relentlessly, and they don't stay in that room. This is where it reaches you. Because when attention fractures at the top, the cost doesn't stay abstract. It travels downward. You feel it as delay, as confusion, as mixed signals that never quite resolve. Policies hesitate, prices twitch, explanations arrive late or not at all. And none of this is framed as failure. It's framed as noise. You're told this is just how things are now. That unpredictability is strength. That improvisation is authenticity. But what's really happening is quieter. Professionals inside the system are compensating so you don't have to see the gap. They rewrite, they reinterpret, they reassure, and that reassurance costs something. Time, clarity, trust. You are expected to adapt to lower expectations, to stop asking why coherence feels optional. Stay with me. Because once the public adjusts, the system locks in. And when that happens, reversing course becomes far harder than anyone admits. By this point, the ripple has left the room. Because power like this is never local. It broadcasts. Allies watch for consistency. Adversaries test for gaps. Markets scan for signals, even accidental ones. And when attention at the center flickers, interpretation fills the void. Statements are discounted, back channels activate, commitments slow. What looks like patience is actually hedging. Foreign partners stop listening to what is said and start watching who steps in afterward. Who clarifies, who reassures, who actually seems to know what comes next. And that shift matters because it quietly moves credibility away from the office and toward the intermediaries. Not officially, practically. The system still functions, but on a delay, on assumptions, on educated guesses. And every guess introduces risk. because misreading intent in energy or foreign policy doesn't just confuse, it escalates. And once that escalation starts, no one is fully in control of how far it goes, which leaves the system balanced on something fragile. Not authority, but interpretation. From here, the future doesn't branch cleanly. It fractures. There are three paths, and none of them announce themselves as choices. The first is adjustment. The system keeps compensating. Aids steer more. Signals are filtered. The center remains, but increasingly symbolic. It works for a while. The second is erosion. Trust thins. Allies hedge harder. Markets react faster. Decisions slow as interpretation replaces clarity. Nothing breaks outright, but everything costs more. The third is rupture, not caused by intent, by timing, a moment where distraction meets consequence, where an offhand signal collides with a real-world response that cannot be walked back or translated away. And here's the dangerous part. From inside the system, all three paths feel manageable until one suddenly isn't, because systems don't fail when people stop trying. They fail when adaptation hides the warning signs. And right now, the system is very good at hiding them, which leaves one final question unresolved. Nothing about this resolves cleanly. Because systems like this don't collapse in public. They thin. They stretch. They normalize what once alarmed. And the most dangerous part is not what happened in that room. It's how ready everyone was for it. The notes, the redirects, the smiles that held too long, that's not chaos. That's rehearsal. A system trained to preserve continuity instead of correcting drift. And that raises a question that doesn't belong to one party or one moment. Who notices when presence becomes optional? Who insists that focus is not a personality trait, but a requirement? Because power without attention doesn't disappear. It migrates into shadows, into intermediaries, into spaces where accountability is harder to trace. If you felt something tighten as you watched this unfold, that's not instinct. It's recognition. Stay engaged. Watch the adjustments, not the statements. The corrections, not the applause. Because the next time this happens, it won't feel surprising. And that's when it matters most, that you're still paying attention